Next up, we have there's an Eliminating Barriers to Educational Excellence Task Force. Who to blame for this is Spencer over here. Has had something to do with some rocks in a backpack, and now we're trying to take them out. But we're calling it something different. We let them come up with their own name, and that's what they came up with. But so we're going to turn the time over to Vice Chair Ellis, who chairs that committee that's in charge of taking rocks out of the...
Right. We thought of stoned, but we didn't think that would go over very well publicly, so wouldn't quite go with our school message. So that's true. That is true. So we've been meeting quite regularly. And it's quite a process. And so one of the things that we're working on right now is brainstorming things that are easy lifts. But what we're finding is that most things are very big lifts. And so we're trying to prioritize. But we put out two surveys. And so across the state, one that went to the education community, to teachers and those in administration and that work for the education system. And we also put out surveys out to the public at large, just kind of asking their input. And we identified, and this is a non-scientific survey because we were using a SurveyMonkey, but we identified some common themes that came back. Class size seems to be the number one item across both the public and the public and the education community's number one issue, and assessments was right up there with that. And other things like student absenteeism and teacher salaries and a whole myriad of things. And we're still trying to dissect the comments that came back with those, because the reasons for being opposed to assessment are going to look different based on who was answering the survey. We're currently, as I said, working on identifying some easy lifts. And so if anyone on the board has anything that they think, or any program you know of that is not being funded or archaic, please let us know, because we're trying to go through, but there's so much to go through. Send us, because we're going to be brainstorming and putting together a list and then prioritizing. We did identify an issue in Utah code. There has been a funding stream for driver's education classes in school districts and charter schools, and the funding comes from a portion of annual driver's education fee tied to annual vehicle registration. So it's $2.50 from each motor vehicle registration for a one-year registration period. The board currently has a large surplus of money from its appropriation because the statutory provisions restrict how much can be distributed to the LEAs. So our staff has been analyzing the programs and services administered by board staff as a part of legislative requests from a 2016 SB2, and have included stakeholders in that conversation. As part of the study, staff and stakeholders recommend that the legislature amend Section 53A 13202 to streamline LEA access to the money by reducing administrative burdens and increasing the amount of money that will flow to LEAs from the appropriation. So the motion that we took as a committee, and we'd like to present before the board, is to support the existing work of staff on this issue and request staff to work with the legislature to amend Utah Code Section 53A-13-202 and other related provisions to, 1, eliminate the reimbursement caps from the code, 2, reduce reporting burdens on the LEAs, 3, distribute more money to LEAs from the money to the board receives from the automobile driver's education tax account, and 4, move the guidelines regulating the program into board rule as opposed to Utah Code. And so that is the motion that we pass as a board. And I see a question. Do you want to?
Yes, Board Member Hanson.
And maybe this is for Natalie, because I think she was there when this happened. So I was at JLC when they discussed this. I have never seen people get so angry and so hot over any issue as they got over this driver's ed issue, and whose money was theirs, and it was supposed to go for their cars, and it was, and they were trying to sort it out. I think Natalie was there when it happened. Are they on board? Is everybody on board with these changes? Because if they're not, then I don't want to be part of the explosion again. I don't want to be there for it.
Let's let,
Okay. Natalie, are you going to speak to this?
So to briefly track back into the past was more of unrestricting those funds and moving them to other places. That's what the issue was a couple of years ago. This issue is completely different and separate. What staff has been doing, what we've been looking into is we've been doing surveys of LEAs trying to figure out how much their fees are. LEAs charge fees for driver's education courses, and their fees vary across the state depending upon what kind of instruction, how many students, number of courses, that kind of stuff. In the statute, there's actually a cap of how much we can pay per student, regardless of any other circumstances. And what we're asking for is that hard number be lifted and that more latitude be provided to the board so that we can take that information that we are still working through and make some recommendations as to ways we could distribute the money easier. We have a lot of data in UTREX, and we'd like to go through and instead of having LEAs file manual reports, use some of the data that we already have, which may work for some of it. We'd like to, based on the revenue that's received, because that amount changes every year, potentially move or set up a minimum amount that each LEA would get and then give them more depending upon the revenue as it comes in. Right now, because of the limitations in the statute, we can't do that. And so largely it would be taking some of those caps out of the statute and moving more discretion to the board that they would make through rule to enable us to better administer that program.
Any other questions? Now, this is really important because as we move forward, it's really important that Vice Chair Ellis says, yes, we have the support of the board to start this. Now, that doesn't mean we approve it. We don't know what's going to come out of it, but this starts things in motion. And then as things get crafted and drafted and things happen, and then we certainly can weigh in on it. But this is kind of a beginning to try to find a betterment. Vice Chair Ellis.
Angie, isn't there a discussion happening soon at the legislature, and that's part of the reason why we wanted to make sure this was discussed today?
Yeah, will you please address why we're doing this quickly today?
Yes, 2 sessions ago, so in 2016, there was some legislative intent language that was inserted into what's called the SB2 bill, which is the big budget bill for public education. The intent language states that the board shall do a study of the services, regulatory compliance and services that are provided here at USBE and make a recommendation to the legislature on things that could be changed or cut or moved down to the LEAs. As part of, we've had a stakeholder group that has participated that includes superintendents, local school board members, and our charter school friends to talk about some of the things that could be changed or moved from being monitored or regulated here at USBE and maybe pushed out to either regional service centers or to districts. One of the items that was discussed, and part of the history of this is because the regulations and the statutory provisions are so strict right now, we have a very large carryover amount that it makes it hard for us to distribute this money down to the districts and charter schools for driver's ed. So one of the issues that was brought up as part of this SB2 report was to make these changes in code and potentially in rules so that it makes it easier for LEAs to get this driver's ed money, and so we won't have this large carryover. So we will be reporting this as part of a report to Public Education Appropriations, and so we wanted to make you aware of it. Also, I think the Eliminating Barriers Task Force felt like it was also reflective of their goal and mission to make things easier for school districts and charter schools. And so it's a way to eliminate a barrier and hopefully get the money to the districts and charter schools and not have such a huge carryover here at USBE. Is that helpful?
Okay, so the motion is to support, what was it again? You had it was really long, but there's a way to abbreviate it.
Yes. Well, this is, I don't know if there's Support the staff working on this issue with the legislature to amend Utah Code Section 53A-13-202 and related provisions to eliminate the reimbursement caps from the code, reduce reporting burdens on the LEAs, distribute more money to LEAs from the money the board receives from the automobile driver's education tax account, and move the guidelines regulating the program into board rule.
Okay, that is the motion. Do we have a second? Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Board Member Belknap.
I know the negotiation last time was to move the money into somewhere else. So as we're talking about this, we're going to try and keep it still in transportation. Could it be used for where students don't have to pay so much to drive, maybe cut that fee in half? So, excellent.
Yeah. Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? Board Member Cannon.
I'm feeling a little rushed into this because I haven't read Section 53A dash whatever.
Well, as Chair Huntsman said, this really just kind of starts the conversation. And so it would be with the legislature. And then as they actually craft a bill, then we could bring it back and see if it was something that we were in agreement with. It just starts the conversation.
This is to initiate a contact. This is that we go to the legislator, find a legislator or to the legislators to take a look at this challenge and come
Will
up with a
you
remedy.
tell me that 53A thing, and I'll look at it in between times.
Yes.
So it's
53A
A.
dash 13 dash 202.
Okay. Thank you.
Now, board members, this is just the beginning because there's a lot of these things that need to be tweaked. And as we discover, in finance, we discovered something last night on who sits on a committee based on statute, and there isn't on that risk management, and there isn't anybody from education. And this, the claims were taken off, and for quite a period of time, and after like 3 years, all of a sudden, oh, hey, we're going to deal with this, surprise. But we could have been invited to attend lots of meetings, but it was recommended that we change to approach the legislature to change so that we have a seat, so that we can be aware of what's happening there. So that will probably come next time. And there might be a handful more with things getting, as the pumps are getting primed for the next legislative session. So there's more to follow. So this is kind of a first, and I appreciate the task force, the work they've done. So with that, there's not any further.
I had a comment.
Okay.
Janet kind of gave me courage. I'm willing to start the conversation, but I remember from years back when this fund had there are kind of two aspects that I remember. One is, and this kind of will resonate with some of you, there were some that didn't want those driver ed fees to be too low because that competed with the private sector that provided driving lessons. So there was some concern about competition and what those fees should be that is somewhere in the middle. Also, some of these funds go to school districts to buy vehicles for drivers for the driver's ed program. I'm not an audit fan at all. I'm an anti-audit-ite. But I was concerned when it was revealed about 10 plus years ago that some of those vehicles were not being used for driver's ed, but they were instead being used for other purposes by other personnel, and that was not, because the money was really significant. It was real money. So I'm willing to start the conversation, but I really want to be, I hope the board's informed at all before we get down the road with a bill, and here it is, and do you like it or not?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Hanson.
That reminded me, Carol, that one of the concerns was that they need that fund to get a little bit larger so that they have enough money to buy cars when they need the cars. And so they didn't want that fund to be, decimated and go down to nothing because they needed money in there so that they could buy cars when they needed cars. So I had forgotten about that. Yeah, for driver's ed, for driver's ed.
Vice Chair Ellis.
I was just going to ask, I am so bad with titles, but Angie Stallings, if she would explain that we have been, I don't know if we want to really state this publicly, but we should own it. There's a portion in the statute that we have not been following, and that's part of the reason why, and we've already been spending the money on driver's ed program. No, that's another one? Oh my goodness, I totally mixed them up. Never mind.
Okay, Angie.
No, the reason we have such a large carryover is because we actually are following the statute. So I think that part of the confusion is a couple of years ago, the legislature was considering, because there was such a large balance in this fund, they were considering taking some of that money and using it for a different purpose, or, that had nothing to do with driver's ed necessarily. I just wanted to make it clear that this money is going to come to us. There's a fee that is associated with your annual registration that goes into an account. The account comes to us. We distribute that money to LEAs. That is not going to change. The proposal will do nothing to move the money anywhere else. It will only go to school districts and charter schools for driver's ed, whether that's for staff, for cars, to reduce student fees for the driver's ed. What the proposal will do is actually make it easier and quicker for the money to get down to the LEAs, and hopefully there's a cap in code that limits the amount of money that we, the board, you, can send to LEAs. We're hoping to resolve a lot of the problems that actually cause the angst of the LEAs feeling like they can't get enough money to do the things that we've mentioned today, and to make it easier for them to get the money and the reporting requirements, et cetera. So far, everyone that we've talked to in the public ed community at the districts and charters, they like this proposal. It's going to help them. So it's not what happened 2 years ago. It's very different.
Okay, well, we have a motion. We have a second. What's that? Not really, but motion to support the existing work of staff on the issue and request staff to work with the legislature to amend Utah Code Section 53A-13-202 and other related provisions to eliminate the reimbursement caps from code, reduce reporting burdens on the LEAs, distribute more money to LEAs from the money the board receives from the automobile drivers education tax account, and move the guidelines regulating the program into board rule as opposed to Utah code. That is a motion that's been seconded. Let's vote on it. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Voting was unanimous. Thank you. Okay,